Let's start with Ricardo Sueiras with Build Without Limits, Lessons Learned from Using AI-Powered Developer Tools. Just a round of applause, please. Thank you.
Thank you. It's nice actually to come to a conference where my name is said correctly, because you can probably tell from my accent, I'm not Portuguese, but every time I come to Portugal, I get people talking to me as if I was Portuguese. You know, it's one of these missed expectations, but my parents actually are Gallegos. So anyone from Galicia here? No? Well, it's very near here, well, north. And so this talk is kind of related in a way that there's a lot of people who've got assumptions and expectations about what AI coding tools are. So this talk really is going to dive into this. I've been using them for about a year and a half. And so I'm going to give a brief introduction into what AI coding tools are for those of you who don't know what they are. I'm going to talk about what they're good at. I'm going to talk about what they're rubbish at and what you need to be careful of. And then I'm going to set you up for success and share how you can improve your own success and then look at what's coming next. So developers, over the years, we've seen tools and the things we use to create software improve over time. So I've been working for over 35 years. When I first started working in tech, people were still using punch cards in some legacy systems. And developers themselves, the tooling we've used, when I first started, we were using, very crude of a large language model that's optimized for coding tasks. That's pretty much how I would define AI coding assistants. And they come in lots of different flavors. Some come as extensions to existing IDEs. Some are forks of those and try and reimagine that. We have completely new editors coming out. This is Zed. Anyone using Zed? Cool. It's awesome. If you're not using it, give it a try. And they're also in the terminal, in the command line as well. And on top of this, we're seeing an explosion of company startups who are creating very specific verticalized tooling that helps developers in specific segments to effectively code using the English language. The AI coding assistants come in two kind of camps. There are those that augment a developer's capability. So you as a developer are in command, in control. And there are those where you kind of just let the AI coding assistant just do everything. So that's a very brief overview, okay, of AI coding assistants. So I'm going to talk about how these tools are most effective, where you as a developer will get the most out of them. So the first one is it makes it much easier as a developer to experiment. If you're working in a company, if you work in innovation, if you're doing prototypes, then these tools really are very effective. And most people probably have heard of this term, vibe coding. Vibe coding is how you can effectively, no, that's not right. Vibe coding is how you can, with very little skill, and that's not moving, is it? I'm not sure what's going on there. Let's try that. No, it's not working. Okay, it's a still for the moment. So vibe coding is, with very little skill, being able to create video arcade games for a particular challenge. But more than that, the AI coding tools from an innovation perspective allow you to experiment with things that you wouldn't, as a developer, typically do. So they generate divergent ideas, divergent code that allows you to experiment. They allow you to learn new things. So this was a blog post beginning of the year that talked about something called negative space programming. Anyone heard of negative space programming? No? Well, nor had I. But it looked interesting. It looked interesting because it allowed me to create better, more robust code. So I took an application I knew the code of that I'd written myself. I asked the AI, can you refactor this code to use negative space programming? And I could now see what this meant in the context of code I understood. But more than that, as a developer, as you're learning new things, sometimes you get imposter syndrome. Sometimes you're afraid to ask these questions. These tools allow you to safely ask these questions and learn. The next area is automation. Some of you may be familiar with this KCD cartoon. It talks about how developers like to automate and the rubric which we decide on whether to automate something and how beneficial it is to us. I've used AI coding tools to do very simple automations like get all my GitHub data, put it into a data warehouse, and then put a graphing tool over it so I can track my GitHub views, my GitHub clones, because GitHub only keeps that for you for 14 days. Lots of people are beginning to write about automation as one of the sweet spots for using AI tools. As developers, we always automate things. The question is, what's the barrier for us to spend time automating? And these AI coding tools now lower that barrier so that there is no excuse to not automate anything anymore. And when I speak to the community, they consistently provide feedback on various channels, on Slack, on Discord, to say what automation they've done and how it saved them time. As a coder, your own code, if you run into problems, these AI coding tools provide really effective ways to debug your code and get extra information, get insights that maybe you wouldn't necessarily find by Googling. I think one of the most exciting things for me as a developer is they allow me to get more things done. And specifically, what they do is they reduce the friction. They reduce the friction of having a blank page. They reduce the friction of me having a task on an existing code base and not knowing where to start. Now, you may be wondering, well, how much better do they make you work? Okay. So this was a study done by Adidas. And they looked at greenfield versus brownfield, so existing code base versus new code base, and the complexity of the code they wanted to create. And whereas brownfield large code bases saw the least amount of improvement, there are significant improvements they saw in the other areas to make this look interesting. As a developer, when we run into problems or we want to use a new library, we typically exit the IDE, we go and do a Google search, or we go to Stack Overflow, we then check our email, we go to Slack, and before we know it, we've lost 20 minutes. So having these AI coding assistants within the IDE allows you to reduce the amount of context switching. You no longer need to leave your IDE. You can do everything you need in there. You can get all the information you need. Okay. Right, so that's the good things, right? Here are the not so good things. The first thing is that there is this gap between what people think these things can do. And typically, I'm not going to say they're management or executives. Are there any executives or managers here? A few. But there is a gap between what they can do versus what they actually really can do. And so this is kind of like a mental model, really, of how we are thinking about these AI coding tools. They work really well in two areas. If you know something, they allow you to go faster, boost, it's called, higher productivity. If you want to learn something, they allow you to more quickly learn things. The more you ask AI coding tools outside your area of expertise, the more danger you will have these tools will hallucinate and you will not be in control of the output. And so this is where the difference between expectation and reality. The next thing, secure code. Put your hand up if you think that AI coding tools generate secure code. Yeah, right. But you pay money. You might be paying $200 a month, right, for these tools. So do you not think you have an expectation that the code it generates is secure? But the reality is that all the AI coding tools hallucinate. And whilst there are lots of efforts being made to reduce that, so we at Amazon are using formal methods, formal reasoning, to come up with ways to reduce drastically the hallucination, specifically in the code space. The important thing is, when you're using these AI code assistants, you have to develop your own method for verifying the code. What this means is that being able to quickly review and understand code that's written is going to be a developer superpower. So you are going to need to be able to be good at doing that. When the output of an AI code assistant is produced, how quickly can you assess it? This is the mental model that I use, right? And it allows me to very quickly to see whether there's an obvious mistake with some code and I want to go back and refactor it, or whether it seems it passes the smell test and I can continue. The next thing is that they work really well on small code bases. They do not work so well on large code bases. Okay. Now there are tricks. People have written about this, and there are tricks, lots of tricks that are evolving that allow you to work around this problem. I actually discovered this problem in January when I was working on a large project. I was using Cursor, and Cursor was just crashing all the time. And so once I stopped using Cursor and I reapproached the problem using a different IDE, I actually was able to get it working. So you have to be aware of these issues. Next one is running offline, okay? If you travel and you become dependent to a certain extent on using these AI coding assistants, when they're not available, that can be problematic. But you can run them offline, okay? Some tools like Roo and Klein allow you to run local either LM Studio or Llama, but you need to make sure that you keep the prompts small, because otherwise the performance of them just doesn't work and they hallucinate even more than the cloud-based ones. The next challenge is more broadly in software, okay? And specifically, if we think about the Python ecosystem, when you use AI code systems, they create an echo chamber. They create an echo chamber of the training data that was used within that model. And what this basically means is that if you've got a new Python library that you've created, and you're really excited, and you're trying to get people to use it, then it's not going to be in the LLM, right? So we are potentially coming to a situation where we're reducing the diversity of libraries and code we use as Python developers. But there is hope, okay, Obi-Wan, and that is that MCP, which I've been experimenting with over the last 3 months, does do a really effective job at overcoming this problem. So I expect now when you create a new library or a new project in Python, you will create a corresponding MCP server so that LLMs can basically know how to use your code. The next kind of like rough edge is really about the existing developer workflows that we have, okay? Various Git flows, every developer is different, but we are going to need to change them, and we're going to need to explore and use new tools. A good example of this is because they create a lot of code, AI coding assistants, and you don't want to rely on them to undo the changes you've made. So what I've been using, I've been experimenting with Git work trees to create virtual kind of like branches very easily, very quickly, and then squash so that basically I then have a more manageable change set to review. So there's a few rough edges, okay? So let's see about how we can make sure that you can effectively keep the AI coding assistant on a very tight leash so that you can actually get the best out of them and so they can work for you and you can see the productivity gains. The first one, which is very hard to tell developers, is before you start using AI coding assistants, is you need to start with intent. And what I mean by that is you don't start writing code. What you do is you start writing context. You start providing information in Markdown documents that will guide the code that's created. Someone's actually given this a name. It's called calm coding, right? Where you actually are chill. You don't actually do any coding. There's actually a a whole philosophy about it. And actually, Rick Rubin, the music producer, legendary music producer, he's actually created a book. It's called The Way of Code, right? Which doubles down on this philosophy. So the reason this is important is because context is everything. AI coding tools, when you use them with a foundation model, they know nothing other than the training data. It's your job to give them the right information to be able to get consistently good output. You have to be specific with the libraries you're using. Okay? If I ask it to use Python Flask, it's going to use Python Flask 2.1. I don't want it to use Python 2.1. Right? I want it to use the latest. Or maybe I want to use Fast API instead. They work really well when you provide examples. So in the prompts and the markdown documents you create, give it an example of what good looks like, and it will use that effectively every single time. We have this concept called perfect functions, where you can actually define some code which you think is your standard, and then the AI will repeat that with other code that you want creating. But like anything, context engineering leads to something called context rot, where people just put too much information, and you get a situation where all the stuff you've been working on, so that's the prompts you're adding, the documents to support it, the history of the conversations, eventually exceeds the memory capacity, the context window, even with the 1 million context windows that you get with some of the LLMs. And this leads to very, very bad outputs. They forget, they prioritize the wrong thing. And so we're moving from this model of moving away from stuffing the context to using tool via MCP, so from RAG to RAT, so retrieval as tool, rather than retrieval augmented generation. Although RAG is still very important, so I'm not saying we're getting rid of it. Kind of the next thing is that these AI coding assistants, they only do well when you break down tasks. So don't give it a big task. You have to take your task and break it down into smaller tasks. Do one thing. And there are now new tools and libraries that help you do this. So they kind of like effectively take your problem and they suggest some ways you can break that into a series of tasks. So the important thing is to make sure that you start building incrementally. And yeah, sorry, have I got 5 minutes, have I? No, okay, so I wasn't sure. Okay, so yeah, so don't expect and don't ask these AI coding tools to build everything for you in one go. Build incrementally, start small and build features that way. So small changes is how you make these tools more effectively produce good code and hallucinate less. And again, I've already talked about this before, you will have to become good at reading code because a lot of code will get generated and it will become your superpower. Okay. So what does this look like in the future? So if we look at where AI coding assistants have come from, okay, we've had autocomplete, IntelliSense, and then the early edition of autocomplete. We've had the chat interfaces that went from ChatGPT to the chat interface within the IDE. We then have agentic flows, which is where we're currently at, where the tools do a really good job at breaking down problems and spinning off code and telling you what's going on. But this space is full of people doing really cool things. And so the next stage really looks about some of the things we've learned about context and context engineering and starts to think about actually how we can use specifications together with these AI coding tools to produce more consistent output. So effectively what the kind of thinking is by a group of developers is that you don't chat to create code, right? You define specifications. Something that when I was doing my TOGAF, I was all about. When I was working in enterprises, we love our enterprise architecture documents, get everything set up. But the problem with those is those documents were one point in time. They got reviewed. something got built and then they never changed, never got updated. Whereas specification-driven development is more about keeping those up to date. And actually, Amazon released a product 2 weeks ago where specification-driven development is the core primitive. And the tool works by, first of all, defining requirements, from requirements creating a design, and then from design building out tasks, incremental tasks, that the AI coding tool will actually generate. But we're also seeing, for those people who remember when Heroku created the 12-factor, we're getting lots of these amplified dev, the new versions of how you should build applications using AI coding assistants. Now, currently, most of the work done in this space has been on the inner loop, so the developer tools, okay? So in the IDEs, in the building, in the command line, in the testing and developing phase. But we're now beginning to see the outer loop, okay? How you actually deploy your application once you've built. And kind of the terminal, the command line, so ADAs, Amazon QCLI, Gemini as well, CLI. These are all tools that are basically now extending the capabilities of AI code assistance beyond the IDE and into the deployment phase. So you might be thinking, what about junior developers, okay? So this is, I think, the CEO of GitHub. And what he says is that AI coding assistants are not a threat to junior developers because the companies have to think about the hiring line and development line of developers. If you get rid of junior developers, then you're not going to have that growth in the future. Kind of even before that, this is the guy from Hugging Face. What he's saying is that, and I've seen this myself, AI coding assistants have become a kind of super gateway for the younger learners to be able to code and learn and understand code and get excited about producing really cool things. And we've done this, we've run workshops with kids and they're producing all sorts of things and they're using the tools and interacting these tools in ways that we just could not have imagined. But there is one thing that no one is talking about. So I've been working in open source for 25 years and I'm not an intellectual property lawyer, but the issue with the way we write code today, okay, as developers, we are authoring the code as humans. Because we're doing that, we can apply intellectual property, copyright, to the code. Generative AI does not allow you, or rather you cannot copyright output from generative AI. What does this mean? Imagine you're a startup, 3 of you, 4 of you. You use generative AI to create the bulk of your code. You have no protection, no copyright or intellectual property controls. So I can take that code and I can run it and I can take your IP. Now, I used to do a lot of work with mergers and acquisitions, companies wanting to be acquired. If I want to acquire you, you've got no value, you've got no intellectual property because it's produced from these AI agents. And this is something at the moment that no one really is talking about. A few people are muttering about it. It's an unknown because no one really has tested it in legal, in courts. Now in the UK currently globally is the only country that has one potential protection, but even that is still not safe. But the US Copyright Office, which normally dictates how copyright works across the world, they have not once, not twice, but 3 times confirmed that you cannot assign a copyright to the output of AIs. So something to think about. So as a developer, when you start using these AI coding tools, they're going to make a lot of the stuff you do very, very simple. And Ken Beck, who's one of the most respected developers, the way he's articulated this is the value of 90% of the work I do as a developer has gone to 0. But the remaining 10% has now gone to 1,000. And what specifically we're talking about is how you understand the problem that the business has and how you're able to take that problem and package it up in a way that these AI coding tools can create code. And that is the superpower. And so we're going to have this spectrum, this continuum of how developers use these AI coding tools versus what they do. And so really just to finish, kind of the hottest new programming language, I say English, but some of the tools now use native language. So Amazon QCLI, which is the tool we use, that can speak Portuguese, Spanish, Japanese, even Quechua, which is not a common language. So if you're wondering what you should do, if you're not using these today, you should be exploring. There is a rule I learned when I was at PwC. It's called the 70-20-10 rule. You can learn 10% of the stuff by doing a course or attending a seminar like this, 20% from discussions with your peers, but 70% of what you learn is only done by doing, and doing on a regular basis. So whatever AI coding tool you use, there's lots of them out there. You should start today. So with that, thank you very much. That is the link to the presentation. And you can contact me on social media through those links. But yeah, I'm not sure if is there time for questions, or do you want to go to the next?
We have time for 1 or 2 questions.
Could you expand on how you solved for large code bases?
So the question was, how do you work around the limitations for large code bases? So there's no one strategy, right? So the way that I found it effective is by breaking down, well, there's a couple of things. First of all, with code I have, I typically try and look at how I can break the code down and manage it, so remove stuff, create virtual directories so that I'm managing the context. That's for existing code. But what we're seeing now is net new code bases that are going to be complex. They're re-architecting their applications. And it's interesting because some of the new patterns I don't necessarily agree with. So a good pattern, okay, is typically you would isolate your HTML, your style, your backend, MVC, all that. You separate them out all to different files, right? Now the pattern is to keep them all in one, right? Now it makes me feel a bit dirty doing that, but this is what people are now beginning to do because they're thinking of AI agents really as compilers, right? So back in the day, if you write Java code, and you don't understand what the bytecode in that JVM is. I mean, you can reverse compile it, right? But AI agents are kind of almost being thought in the same way. Do you really care what the code looks like as long as it meets the business needs? Now, I still, as a developer, I feel uncomfortable with that. But this is what people are now beginning to do. So we're going to see new patterns that optimize project layouts for large understanding, for the understanding of AI agents so that they can work on small and large code bases. It's okay.
Yeah, thank you, Ricardo. Very nice. On one of slides, you showed the list of best practices.
The list of?
Best practices, like review code, review architecture,
so for the trust and verify?
Yeah.
Yes, that's what I use. I'm not saying it's the best way or the only way, but it's what I've developed over time.
Yeah, but they looks really logical. And the question, did you try to automate it with agents, like to get first results to see? And second related question, agents usually leads to increasing the cost because quite often for a really simple question, they actually generate huge amount of tokens.
Yeah. So I haven't tried automating it, no. And the reason why is that this is my view. I'm not sure necessarily it's Amazon's view, but my view is that any code that an AI agent produces must be reviewed by a human, right? I would not feel comfortable pushing something, and it's your responsibility. You can use the AI agent to develop the code, to produce the code, but it's on you. So even if I automated that task, I would still need to review the code as a human.
Yeah,
right?
and the idea like pre-generate results of these
You
suggestions, but you still
yes, I could. So again, Amazon Q has this built in. There's a /review, so I don't need to do that. So, but other AI coding tools you have to, right? So then you probably would have a some kind of prompt that you would create. Yeah.
And can I run Amazon Q on premises in the company?
Yes. Well, you can run. So Amazon Q CLI is open source, so you can run it anywhere. But the endpoint is always a cloud, so you can't. It doesn't support local. I am trying to change that. I'm trying to get them to use local models, right? Because I believe strongly in the future is SLMs, not LLMs. So I'm trying to push that, right? So it may happen in the future. It's an open source project, so you can fork it and maybe even change that yourself, right? If you do, let me know, right? I'll be using it.
Thanks a lot. Yeah. Okay.
Unfortunately, there is no more time for questions, so here's the presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ricardo.